It is with much delight and pride that I introduce this year's CAMRHA Annual Lecturer, one of the most exciting anthropologists in the world today, in my view, Clara Han, Professor of Anthropology at Johns Hopkins University and President-elect of the Society for Medical Anthropology. As many of you know, Clara is also part of CAMRHA's International Advisory Board. Clara received her PhD in social anthropology from Harvard and MD from Harvard Medical School in 2007. Very few anthropologists, at least in my generation, are able to conduct long-term ethnographic fieldwork in entirely distinct distinct geographies and parts of the world, as Clara has done in Latin America, and in recent years in what promises to be a long and exciting arc of writing in Korea. Her first book, Life in Debt, Times of Care and Violence in Neoliberal Chile, published by University of California Press in 2012 and translated into Spanish in 2022, remains one of the most taught and cited books of anthropology across the world, with its experience-near depiction of economic precarity and forms of mutuality. I'm happy to say it's compulsory reading in our Mina Sol, who's here, her course on theory in anthropology for both undergraduate and postgraduate levels. So if you're at SOAS, you partly have to read Clara's writing, although you'll happily read it out of choice as well. Her next major book, Seeing Like a Child, Inheriting the Korean War 2021, was awarded the Association for Feminist Anthropology's Senior Book Prize, and was a finalist for the 2022 Victor Turner Prize in Ethnographic Writing. Her next book is soon to be published in 2023, Echoes of a Death, in 2026, this year, Echoes of a Death, and hopefully we'll be hearing parts of this forthcoming book in today's lecture. In other related trajectories, Clara has a significant body of collaborative work as well, alongside, for example, yesterday's speaker, Veena Das. She co-edited the astonishingly 45-chapter volume Living and Dying in the Contemporary World, a compendium which many of us use for teaching medical anthropology. Clara and Veena also created a new form of method which many of us have used on intra-household decision-making during the COVID-19 pandemic, which is a very important overlap with the work that CAMRHA is doing in terms of thinking of method. And it's also been my honor to work with Clara for many years now. In 2017, Clara and I co-founded Thinking from Elsewhere, an anthropology book series at Fordham University Press that we co-edit with Andrew Brendel from the University of Chicago. Our CAMRHA Book Prize workshop comes out of similar processes that we had created for Thinking from Elsewhere, that is workshops for junior first-time authors, and to our delight, many of the authors that we mentored, like Web Havsaria and Mayur Suresh from SOAS, went on to win major book prizes, and our series has published 18 books or so by now. And many of us here at SOAS and much beyond continue to be inspired by Clara's work. So thank you so much, Clara, for joining us and for giving our 2026 annual lecture. Please join me in welcoming Clara.
Okay. Thank you so much, Brigu. And I just wanted to say thanks to David, Nikita, and Brigu for just this enormous amount of work to bring the center together. And it's just been really amazing to actually see from last year to this year how much work has gone into the center. Also, I just wanted to thank Michelle for all of the work that she has done as well in bringing us together. So, so I'll just start. They say this is normal, but I am learning to live it. Martita said these words in a quiet, low voice, as if in conversation with herself. She and I were sitting on green plastic chairs in the storefront built into the front patio of her house, where she had sold fast food, pizza, hot dogs, with her son Camilo. The storefront's black metal sliding door was open. Sunlight streamed in through the wrought iron gate. My calls to her outside the sliding door that afternoon had woken her up from a deep sleep in her windowless, pitch-black bedroom. As she slid the door open, she shielded her eyes from the sunlight and ushered me inside. 6 months had passed since the police had killed Camilo during a drug raid, right at the threshold of this sliding door. At the time of his death, his girlfriend, Ana, was 8 months pregnant. The couple were in a playful back and forth as to where they would reside with the baby. Camilo and Ana had decorated his bedroom in his mother's house with a large light purple baby banner over the bed that said, "Welcome." In Ana's bedroom, in her parents' house, they painted the walls a soft pink. The banner, the hopeful anticipation, the aspirations and fears shattered by what had become the rhythm of police operations in this and other intensively policed neighborhoods in Santiago, Chile. The year was 2012. I was brought to a neighborhood that I will call El Hilo by my close friend Ruby, who lives in La Pincoya, and whose words and life story appear in my first book, Life in Debt. Ruby was working for an NGO that administered emergency work employment programs for women in low-income neighborhoods. Precariously employed with no fixed contract, Ruby was to go to every employment site and verify the working hours of the women by having them sign a notebook that would be presented to the NGO office in the Barrio Alto, or the upper-class neighborhood. By the time Ruby was working in El Hilo, it had been under police occupation for over a decade, on the premise that it was, in the state's eyes, a barrio crítico, a critical neighborhood. Critical neighborhood was the state's story of poor neighborhoods immersed in criminality, defined by the central figure of the gang, which sowed social disorder through their participation in the drug economy. To reinstate a normative social order, the state authorized police intervention in the form of occupation. Different police forces and police units were on the ground in El Hilo at different times. The Carabineros, the National Police Force, which conducts street patrols and is under military jurisdiction, were stationed at passageways leading into and out of the neighborhood. A bus, special forces bus at a fixed point, was stationed on one of the main corners of the neighborhood, with 3 to 4 armed carabineros standing in body armor. The GOPE, which is the Special Operations Police Group, made rounds throughout the passageways in an armed vehicle. The Anti-Narcotics Brigade of Police Investigations, the Civilian National Police Force, conducted sporadic drug raids. It was during one of these drug raids that Camilo was killed. As I accompanied Ruby, I started to see the dangers that her job entailed, and I questioned why she, the lowest paid among the NGO staff, but with possibly the largest family to support, had been sent to walk up and down the streets to surveil women's work in a neighborhood where crossfire was a daily occurrence. Yet the women, having grown close to Ruby, enabled her work in what I can only describe as a network of embraces in which I too became enmeshed. Women hooked arms with Ruby, accompanying her to the next employment site, a school, to the next, a church, to the next, a community center. Along the way, stepping quickly into a neighbor's house when gunfire broke out or a drug raid was underway. Crouching low and getting flat on the floors, quickly entering the back of a house when gunfire erupted within narrow passageways. Using cell phones to call ahead to see if things were still brígido, or dangerous or tense, or calming down. The women in the programs introduced me to other women, and through them I met Martita, her intimate kin and extended kin. I spent 9 continuous months accompanying Martita and her kin, visiting the offices of municipal bureaucrats and lawyers in human rights and criminal law, the court, and visiting 30 households in 2012, followed by shorter visits in 2014, and I hope this works. Yeah. Is this working? Yeah, and 2014, which were then followed by contact via Facebook, emails, and phone calls to this day. Through these relations, in a whole host of encounters with neighbors, police, social workers in the neighborhood, during periods of gunfire and during drug raids, during birthday celebrations and commemorations, in daily household chores, and in children's play and quiet moments of reflection, I came to hear Martita's words again. They say this is normal, but I am learning to live it. That is, when Martita says, they say this is normal, she voices a disappointment within these taken for granted third-person narratives. What she voices instead is what this loss is for her. I am learning to live it. This is the pain. This pain is what ushers us into a dark scene of learning, in which we may not know our way about. In this lecture, I ask how dwelling in the singularity of a life, tracing the echoes of a death within this life, shows how neighborhood is that which is folded into this life, rather than that which is placed before us, as if our eyes can scan over it, much like the surveillance cameras do in policing. What would need to acquire importance or attention if we do not simply take the neighborhood as a unit of state administration, or conceive the neighborhood in terms of neighborhood effects defined primarily in terms of outcomes of geographically defined social determinants? Here I describe preparing the ground for a commemoration of the first anniversary of Camilo's death, paying attention to how it gathers up various figures, practices, and vocabularies from municipal bureaucracy, the courtroom, the news, human rights institutions, and encounters among neighbors. I suggest that this work to have dis-state violence recognized through the criminal justice system of the death of an individual is informed by and what happens within the life of the community as knit together through the labor of women. That is, life lived with others. So let me drop us into the middle of the story. Constanza, a psychologist, and Luciana, a social worker, sit at the kitchen table as Martita prepares tea. Along with two young lawyers, they form the Municipal Support for Victims Unit of the Office of Mediation and Citizen Protection of the municipality that was created under the Piñera government's Ministry of the Interior Public Security Plan and its national policy for victims of crime. With the aims of preventing re-victimization and secondary victimization by institutions, in particular, this is for a defined list of violent crimes, the policy sought to redefine the role of the lawyer from one solely defined by legal representation in the justice system. Instead, the lawyer, with the psychologist and social worker, created a professional unit that not only mediated the victim's encounter with the justice system, but also sought to address the various needs that were arising from the experience of victimization. So, for example, victim support could range from arranging for transportation to the justice center, or the municipality to file paperwork, to arranging for a seed grant, to restore a storefront, to earn income without resort to the black market, like that is to prevent resort to the black market, to providing psychiatric or psychological treatment to the victim. In the early phases of this policy, support for victims of crime units were targeted to areas where there were high concentrations of victimization from crime. So these are also highly policed areas. So pairing that establishment of these units with neighborhoods under concentrated policing. While resecuring the figure of the delinquent as the perpetrator internal to the neighborhood and creating a relay between the support of a victim and policing schemes, the policy also created the possibility for advocacy for victims of state violence from within the municipal bureaucracy. Constanza and Luciana, this is the social worker and psychologist, took up Martita's case as a case of what they called state crime. At first, their visit to Martita's house seemed to be simply about the usual stuff of social work, missed appointments and missed phone calls, but it morphed into something else. Luciana, the social worker, mentions that in a meeting with the mayor, they learned that the criminal case was moving very slowly. The PDI, or police investigations, quote, is forming a circle of protection for this functionary. We have to build our own circle of protection, working together, because all of these efforts that we are doing in different directions could become dispersed, she says. Martita, you are not alone. And she says nosotras, like in the feminine, we. Martita simply looks at them and says tightly, I haven't received any information on the legal proceedings since February. Now we are almost in the month of June. Her taut voice starts breaking. This has been a torment for me. Nothing has been happening with this legal case. And I feel shame with my family because I can't say to them that we are advancing. I took charge of looking for justice for my son because I gave birth to him. But I don't see that it's moving forward. The police functionary has not even given his declaration. Nearly a year has passed and nothing has moved. It has been a torment that I carry inside. Looking at me, Luciana responds, quote, this is why I want to make contact with international human rights organizations so that this case doesn't remain in impunity. Constanza turns to Martita, remarking that there was another young man murdered by police in the comuna. His mother did a velaton. This is a candlelight vigil that commemorates the dead for the community. But very few people came. I think it is because she did not have the same support you have. We could do a campaign from now until the date of Camilo's death, closing with an act of commemoration. Martita takes over Luciana's words, so that the población, she says, is brought together. She begins to weep. In the weeks following this encounter, I saw how the unit staff offered to Martita a pedagogy on the law and on the practices of grassroots organizations that had been molded by the state as community partnerships. On the one hand, the unit lawyers partnered with an excellent pro bono criminal lawyer from the University Law Clinic, presented Martita with what the pro bono lawyer called, quote, realistic expectations, as he said. Quote, I doubt that a priori he will be sent to prison. This is the functionary. Sooner or later, he will give his declaration for the case and collaborate. We go to the trial, and it's likely that in court, considering these factors that he has no criminal record, irreproachable conduct, that he will be granted probation. It could be that he continues in the institution. It could be that he is put into an administrative position and his access to firearms taken away. He stresses that PDI protects their own, that, quote, in Chile, the punishment for robbery is greater than for murder. On the other hand, the social worker and the psychologist sought to build what they called a circle of protection in a form recognizable to the state, that is, a community organization for human rights and the mobilization of publicity on the case within the media to put pressure on the justice system. And I'm not going to get into that entire question of publicity, but just to say that this is, it was actually through a series almost of accidents in which we get scooped up into a news event on this case that ends up on the national news. So as we will see, this is not a story of municipal bureaucrats over here and neighborhood and its norms over there. Rather, it is their absorption into each other that marks this story. So now let me just pause a bit and provide you an example of the texture of the give and take of everyday life in which the language of the justice system and human rights is absorbed into ordinary talk before I kind of come back to this, to the making and unmaking of a community organization. And I hope that you'll see the significance later on. So this is just a very brief scene. Neighbor Lorena stops to greet Martita at the gate of the storefront. Her hand wrapped around the yellow metal gate, leaning in, she asks how Martita's case is walking, andando. But in the next breath, Lorena tells us a dream. I dreamt with my son last night. There are only a few times that I've dreamt with him. Yes, one time I dreamt with him, just when he was killed by the carabineros. He was lying in bed, sleeping. I saw his face clean, pretty. He was with a smile, and I said, good, my son is resting in heaven. Martita responds, I dreamt with Camilo once, but he was not sleeping. I was conversing with him. He was seated here, pointing to one of the green plastic chairs in the storefront. I said, Camilo, I said, Camilo, you need to take care when you're walking in the street. You need to take care. And he listened to me and said, yes, mama. So she's actually alluding to the criminal case actually here. Martita continues, you have the same lawyer for human rights in the municipality. Lorena responds, It's that I don't fixate on the process. I just let it walk because it is slow, because of military justice. I have to continue with life. I cannot be on top of them. One loses time. It's that more than earthly justice, justicia terrenal, I say justice is divine, and I say that it is God who judges all. Because of this, I have a tranquility, because I do not believe in justice below. I believe in divine justice in God. Martita responds, I don't know. Lorena continues, así es, vecina. This is how things are, neighbor. I have to take care of the abuela, the grandmother. There's a term for an elderly neighbor, my friend's mother. My friend died 3 months after they brought her mother back home. She spent a lot of time with her. Her mom was ill. She could not walk. She did not want to eat, move, go out to buy groceries. My friend was taking care of her. She had to do everything for her mom. Her mom could no longer talk. She could neither move her body. It was so much that she had to take her to a nursing home. She always was going there. She thought she had, and then she's continuing to talk like this, right? Valentina, the 10-year-old daughter of the next door neighbor, passes by with a group of children. Valentina doubled over, hands behind her back. Her friend is pushing her forward. They are laughing. Every time Valentina is pushed, she yells, Paco, Paco, cop, cop. Mirna, the 8-year-old daughter of Zoe's sister Karina, walks past us on the opposite sidewalk. Martita calls out to her. Mirna walks over to the gate. Martita walks into the kitchen and comes back with a plastic bag full of bread. She passes it through the gate to Mirna. Toma, hijita. Take it, child. Mirna's round cheeks blush. She crosses back to the other side of the street and runs into her grandmother's house. Lorena trails off, looking down the street. Yeah, I should be on my way. Take care of yourself. So it's these kinds of ways in which the talk around cases actually is happening. Okay. So, right. So let me return to another scene and continue with the making and unmaking of the community organization. Martita gives us a burdened sigh as she sits with Beatriz, Ana's sister Gabi, and me. She relates to us her meeting with a social worker, Luciana, who has suggested again to Martita that she could form a community organization with personalidad jurídica, so a legal organization, legally defined community organization in the neighborhood to help her make her son's case, quote, walk. Ana's mother, Beatriz, says, why not us? Why don't we just make the group ourselves? She starts counting herself, Martita, her 2 daughters. That's already 4 members. Beatriz adds, and Clarita can help us with the paperwork, so why not? The police treat us like delinquents, but we are not the delinquents. We are the victims. This has to do with human rights, so we can form our own group. I am unsure what has taken hold of Beatriz in this moment. Martita reminds Beatriz, but it's that everyone needs to come for meetings. That is what a group is. They meet, they have a plan, and they have to work together. Beatriz retorts, Clarita, you can help Martita remind neighbors to come for the meeting. And I'm like, oh, of course, I say, glancing at Martita. And so I accompany Martita as she goes to a few neighbors to invite them to what she calls the group. Yet navigating invitations to the group itself is laden with the knowledge of harms and betrayals that pulse under the euphemisms and fleeting small talk in neighborhood life. We visit Zoe, we talk to Blondie, we bump into Chiara. Martita invites Consuelo, Chiara invites Maribel, Blondie invites Susana. Why not Celia, I ask? Because Celia has an issue with Maribel. Why not Ermina? Because her sister-in-law has an issue with my daughter-in-law's sister. Each of the women who agree to be on the steering committee then must also, and there's other filters here, must request and pay a fee for an official criminal record to demonstrate that they have not been convicted of crimes. The group is formalized as a community organization by the social worker who verifies each neighbor's national ID when they sign the Constitutional Act and organizational statutes in a face-to-face meeting held in Martita's house. And so just to say that this was actually quite a bit to ask of the women when they may have family members who are in fact under fleeing warrants. In the first few meetings, Beatriz is particularly animated in creating plans for the organization, both for the commemoration and beyond. The Carabineros street police, had killed her son just 2 months before the PDI had killed Camilo. But because her son seemed to inhabit the figure of victim and delinquent, he had been shot and killed while allegedly committing a crime, her case had not found traction within the unit. Would the human rights organization open up pathways for her son's case, among others that were shadowed by delinquency? The meetings among the women also showed, however, that the vocabulary on crime had been absorbed into ordinary talk. Beatriz opens a notebook and holds a pen. 1, we need to gather all of the cases. Another neighbor, Zoe, interrupts. The impotencia, the impotence, because the police always put us in the same sack. Those who commit crimes and those who don't. They do what they want. Other women agree and offer other stories of police brutality in the neighborhood. Maribel then speaks up. They put my sister and brothers in prison, and I had to take care of their children. It's the police intervention that did this. Maribel is in a wheelchair, paralyzed from the waist down. The conversation in the room falls to a murmur as the women glance at each other. Martita blurts out angrily, No, that's not correct, Maribel. You need to acknowledge the truth, that your nephew shot you. This was not the police. We cannot keep saying that it was always the police that is shooting and killing us when we are killing ourselves too, our own children who have guns. What do you feel when you see the children crawling down on the ground when there is a gunfight? When we can't even leave the house to buy bread? We need to recognize when it is one of our children that hurts us. This is our responsibility to recognize. You need to recognize. I tensely exchange glances with Zoe, who meets my eyes and then looks down to her hands. Beatriz is watching Martita, seemingly looking for a moment to step in. The others shifting uncomfortably in their seats. As Martita goes on, Maribel starts to cry. But I can't. It's my blood. Es mi sangre, it's my blood, right? My kinship, right? Martita snaps back. You have to acknowledge it. I remember the first time I met Maribel, when I accompanied Martita to drop off a wheelchair at her house. She was in bed in the living room. Her husband, Victor, was sitting next to her. Martita introduced me and said to Maribel, explain to Clarita how you got into this condition. I was taken aback by the question, but Maribel answered simply, by a bullet, of course. I was across the street at the bazaar. Having received a bit of extra money from her son, she went to play the slots across the street. Quote, I received a bit of help and then I went to spend it. I felt the gunfire. Well, in whatever moment this could arrive to one. Martita tried to pry it out that it was her nephew, her sister's son, who shot her. But he was walking, playing. Martita used excuses. Playing. He was playing with the pistol. The bullets, they came from the house to here. The only thing I thought of was that my son was walking around, that if I died, my son would. She makes a gesture of the gun with her hand, intimating that he would seek revenge. Well, we avoided that. The two, her son and Victor, her husband, would have been, but no, God is great. God is great to me. Martita asked, but when did you know that it was your nephew that did this? Maribel responded, he's my godson. When I was in the ER, the carabinero said to me, it's your nephew whom you took care of for life. I told them, no, it's a lie. A cop told me it was your nephew. I went crazy. Victor began to speak over Maribel, intense anger in his voice. We had pure hate. We, so impotent. Not a single one of them has approached us. We just had to keep going ourselves alone. Maribel echoed Victor. When I got out of the hospital, they all came to see me. I was in bed. I looked over there at Victor, at my son with hate, Victor with hate. 2 years ago, the police conducted a drug raid on their passageway, where Maribel's siblings also reside. Going house to house in search of drugs, the police eventually arrested Maribel's 2 sisters, their partners, and her brother and his wife for drug trafficking. The children were left behind with no adults in the house to take care for them. Maribel ran to her younger sister's house to find her sister's infant daughter and toddler son. She brought them and her older sister's teenage sons to her house. She cared for them while her siblings and their partners were incarcerated for 2 years. As Maribel said, quote, all of my people, todo están preso, mi gente. All of my people were incarcerated. I took care of all of them. I fought with him, the one who shot her. He fought with my son because they were accustomed to eating good food. We are poor. So when she says we are poor, she's actually using this as an expression, not of the state's administration of the poor. She's using this expression in relation to being involved in the drug economy, right? you know, so a soup, cazuela, tallarines, pasta. They didn't eat it, and they got angry, the two older ones. But look, I never left them uncared for. I started with the idea that they are one of my kids, and they will never do anything. This is the truth, because it was not done intentionally. She looks at Martita. It was not intentional. You understand? Outside, they say this, afuera. Like, they say this and that. Lie, mentira. Maribel had honed the use of the passive voice and the vocabulary of accident to live with the overwhelming knowledge of the lethal potential in kinship. This is not only the knowledge that her nephew shot her, right, but the entirety of the injury here. Her son and her husband's hate, the potential that they might wield violence on her siblings and their families, the acid betrayal as her sister is released from prison. As her sister is released from prison. But offers no help to Maribel, who's now contending with lifelong disability and searing chronic pain. The loss of the infant daughter, whom she raised for the first 2 years of her life, and who was taken away from her abruptly upon her younger sister's release from prison. This entirety called for the event to be rendered with an indefinite quality. A gun fired itself. It wasn't intentional. He was playing and it just went off. It was a bullet that came to me. Maribel's appeal, this is the truth, is an expression of this attunement to the fragility of intimate relations. Her deflection of what one hears on the street as a lie is not posing truth against falsity, but an expression of what is at stake for her. It was difficult to witness Martita try to wrest a recognition out of Maribel, a moment when the familiarity of the neighbor stood in for the intimacy with this neighbor. The meeting ends awkwardly in the wake of the outburst. Women make excuses that they have to get going. They tell Martita that they will be in touch about the commemoration with vague promises. Whatever is needed, count on me. Only Susana remains behind, sitting with Martita and me around the paraffin stove. She and Martita are acquaintances in the neighborhood. I didn't want to tell you this, she says, but I also lost my nephew to the Carabineros. They killed him. He had a tear roll down his face and he died. We did everything. We went to the press, todo show, everything, like a show, the publicity. And I get to the commissary, and you would not believe who I see seated working there, the same cop. She throws some more eucalyptus leaves on from the table onto the stove. So I want to thank you for working so much for all of us. Over the next few months, I accompanied Martita as she and a few members of the group learned human rights as encounters with institutions. With the coordination of Luciana and Constanza, Martita, Beatriz, along with Zoe, have a meeting with lawyers from the National Institute of Human Rights. Their nervous stroll into the gleaming white building with large windows is met with lawyers who warmly invite them to sit at a seminar table with a small plate of cookies. The women take up the testimonial genre of what they had endured and witnessed, and while there were some nods of affirmation and hugs at the end of the meeting, no concrete steps were offered to the women at that moment, nor were ways forward presented later on. On the way back to El Hilo, Martita remarked to Luciana, "And so? They have no response? They can hug me all they want." But I did not come for hugs. I came for them to acknowledge what happened to Camilo, to our family, and to do something. Another well-meaning, dedicated human rights lawyer working for the state makes an effort to come to El Hilo to address the group. He gives a stirring speech on the importance of human rights in Chile and how their experiences need to be legitimated, but the sheer difficulties of following up with his overburdened staff, who are comprised of law students circling in and out of internship practicums, combined with the intermittent participation of women in the group, and slowly erodes the contact with his office. As time went on, I saw how difficult it was for Martita to sustain these meetings. Even as Beatriz prodded Martita, volunteering me to go round to invite the women, Martita's exhaustion was palpable. The neighbors, too, seemed to feel the weight of the meetings, as invitations would be met with hesitant agreements to be later patched over with apologies. An errand, an aching hip, a doctor's appointment, a prison visit, an emergency. Martita herself started to avoid calling meetings. She deferred asking me to go from house to house, extending invitations. One evening, as we drove back from a visit to Beatriz and Ana's house, Martita tells me with a large sigh that Beatriz was pressing her to call for yet another meeting of the group. But each time she called a meeting, she would feel sick, quote, because people are not committed. I ventured, it is also okay to not call a meeting. And she asked me, so you would not be disappointed? I ask you so many times to go to the neighbors, to go here and there, you always trying to get neighbors to show up. Surprised and somewhat relieved, I tried to reassure her that of course I would not be disappointed. What I was not quite able to say was that my walking around here and there to gently remind neighbors was not done with any lofty ideas of justice, but rather because I simply dreaded Martita's invitations going unanswered from the neighbors next door. Yet even as the group slowly unraveled, the idea of the commemoration was a seed that was already beginning to sprout. Martita asked me to make a video collage of photos for the commemoration. She imagined a story of her son's life from birth to the day before he died, told through family photos and projected onto the outside of her house, right next to the front door where he was shot. It was the creation of a new practice with photos that grew from within this form of life, in which photos of young men who have died untimely deaths are displayed in homes, carried on keychains, placed in car windows, and embedded in ensembles of gestures, kissing the photo and saying goodnight, telling a daughter whose father was killed to kiss your father, kissing the photo, the expression of the desire to bring the dead into being for oneself and for this child. But Martita's ideas of projecting the photos on the outside of the house brought this intimate kinship and the domestic into the street and showed how the neighborhood was folded into this life. We sat on the floor surrounded by shoeboxes filled with photos and documents. But at the bottom of one of the boxes were two folded pieces of paper. Each paper had an umbilical cord inside it, in the cords of Martita's two older sons. The paper notes the date when each of the cords fell off their bodies. She holds the cords in the palm of her hand, remarking to me, so that you see how I am as a mama. I even saved the umbilical cords of my sons. She begins to search for the paper holding Camilo's cord in the other boxes. Camilo's must be around here somewhere too. But as she was searching for the cord, she was stopped by a photo. The photo was Camilo as a little boy holding up a banana underneath a street lamp. You know the saying, I love you to the moon? When he was little, he would always say to me, Mama, I love you until a plátano, a banana. That child, he saw that banana as the shape of the moon. Another photo, her older sons as small children dressed up in traditional garb. Another photo, Camilo, around 6 or 7 years old, asleep in his bed next to his eldest brother. Each photo ushers forth stories. She paused. When I see the photos, I feel that my son is present. Faced with the delicate task of making this collage, I asked Martita if she would like to select the photos that I could then scan for her. To my surprise, she responded, I leave it to you, Clarita. For weeks, every evening, I sit and scan photos from the boxes using my small portable scanner. Martita accompanies me watching TV news. Occasionally, she looks over what I'm holding in my hands, sometimes offering a story and taking it into her own hands. A piece of paper with his name, its etymology and the meanings associated with the name. A photo of her sitting on a bus looking down at her purse with an amused smile while Camilo, as a 7 or 8-year-old child, makes a funny face at the camera. A document of his baptism at the Catholic parish. A photo of his first birthday party, the cake dwarfing his chubby face. A photo of Camilo and his older brother, Rafa, in school uniforms, the dark blue blazers, white shirts, and gray slacks. There are school photos of his 4th grade class, smiling children lined up in rows with teachers at the sides. Photos of her eldest son's wedding, posing formally for the camera and at meals. Photos of her sister, Lola's husband, hugging a small Camilo days before he was also killed by gunfire. Photos with Camilo playing with friends in the neighborhood. I begin to keep track of the photos she takes into her hands, letting her gestures guide mine. Meanwhile, neighbors here and there stopped by to ask how they could lend a hand for the commemoration. Labors were taken up, painting, cooking, cleaning, sewing, as we came closer to the date of Camilo's death. In these preparations, loosely coordinated, if at all, human rights transfigured in the neighborhood milieu from one of staking a claim to human rights in general to the labor of acknowledging this death. These actions were not carried in the sense of being duty-bound to a pre-existing social, but what simply, in the words of women, are born from me, me nace. That is, in being born from me, they took up the practices that surrounded death and made something new. For example, neighbors brought what seemed like hundreds of white balloons, blowing them up one by one to tie them together on strings, crisscrossing all 4 streets where the police had come up during the drug raid that had killed Camilo. Where when a neighbor has died, neighbors on the specific passageway tie white balloons to their house. Other neighbors arrive bearing brooms, dustpans, and cans of white paint. They sweep the sidewalks and the gutters next to the roads for a block in every direction of the house and on each side of the road. Then they get to work painting the curbs of the blocks in every direction white. Other neighbors bring hundreds of candles to assemble a velaton that spans the length of the main road in the neighborhood. In the preparations for the commemoration, the community organization, unraveled in terms of the meetings among neighbors, now appears in the bureaucratic documents to claim the particular corner of the street where Martita's house resides and where a special forces bus is stationed as a fixed point within the neighborhood. The social worker, Luciana, asked me to type out and print a request in the name of the organization to the police commissary to request that the special forces bus be moved further down the street, sending me over email the precise language for the request, as well as a PDF document with a letter of support from the unit. I accompanied Martita to the commissary. We are attended to quickly, yet several functionaries ask Martita the same question. What is the event? When will it be held? We finally end up with the captain's office, who looks over the paperwork, asking Martita again what the event is for and when and for how long it will be held. Martita keeps her cool. A lower-level desk officer produces a commissary letter of permission to the organization with an official stamp. I ask whether it would be possible to have 5 copies of the letter, making the excuse that we might need them for different checkpoints. The lower-level officer looks at me, shrugs his shoulders, and prints off 4 more copies. On the morning of the commemoration, the sky is gray, but it does not rain. I arrive with my partner Martin in the morning. Martita is carrying a large pot of prepared chicken from the oven to the back patio. She tells me that she had stayed up until 3 a.m. painting the front of her house a bright yellow, while her daughter-in-law, Allegra, wiped down the floors of her house. The cops were looking at me as if I was crazy. She points to the rice that is now finished, the potatoes diced and boiled, the large colanders of shredded lettuce, and the consommé boiling on the range. Martita hands Martin and I a large white bedsheet to hang on the outside wall of her house as a screen for the projection of the video collage that I had edited and paired with Camilo's favorite songs that Martita had found stored in his cell phone. She moves the poster of Camilo hanging in her storefront and attaches it to the front of her house, next to the gate of the storefront where he had been killed. She places a small table underneath the poster. Later, Beatriz will bring an arrangement of red flowers to place next to the poster. As Martita leaves for prayers in the cemetery, she asks me to mind the house. News of the commemoration has made its way through the neighborhood. As neighbors stop by, I hand out flyers that Luciana had prepared that detail the day's events. Join us for a bocinazo, this is honking your horn, at 2:30, the hour and minute when Camilo was shot. Join us again at the commemoration ceremony at 5 p.m. Beatriz arrives with her husband, sister, and grandparents, Senora Gloria and Don Manolo, grandchildren of her son Nestor. Martita arrives with Ana and her sister Gabi. Their cousins arrive on foot. Beatriz and her husband take large pots of cazuela out of the trunk of their car and other food, as well as folding tables. They set up tables for lunch for the extended families. Neighbors Blondie and Maru arrive. They work to tie more balloons on a long string and hang a string of balloons in the crisscross pattern across the main street. A light rain starts to sprinkle down on us. Without looking up from her hands on knotting strings, Blondie says, "Oh, salió más llorón. You turned out to be such a crier." She is speaking to Camilo. Senora Gloria, Beatriz's mother, says, looking up, "Está con pena." He's with pain. An hour later, a police officer comes by the house. He says that they have not received instructions to move the Special Forces bus for the commemoration. The bus remains at the fixed point at the corner of Martita's house. I give them another copy of the letter. A half hour, another a police officer comes to the house. He repeats the same story. And finally, after all of the letters, and this is why I had printed out so many of them, after all of the letters are given, they finally move the bus. As the bus moves down the road, Martita's son drives up the street in his car. He parks it diagonally across the street so that no other traffic can come through. Other neighbors drive up. They also park diagonally on both sides of the main street, forming a protective ring around the area where the commemoration will be held. As the time draws closer to the moment that Camilo was shot, the Special Operations Golpe, the armored vehicle, rounds the adjoining streets. It swerves up to the parked cars, backs up and screeches away, repeatedly. No one engages. But the screeching fills the air with tension. Neighbors drive up their cars. Martita takes her own car out of the garage. They park along each of the roads that forms the intersection at Martita's house. Blondie tells me that the neighbors at the entrance of the neighborhood have set up fogatas. These are burning barricades. So this is what would normally what one would see in a protest, right? So they have set up fogatas to block the police vehicles from entering the neighborhood. At 2:30 p.m., when Camilo was shot by police, the church bell of the local parish begins to toll. Rung by the nun who has lived in the neighborhood for decades, the bell gives a heavy, plaintive ring over and over and over. Martita, her sons, Beatriz, Blondie, the neighbors up and down the street get into their cars, doors open, and begin to honk their horns. But this was not the usual pattern or rhythm of a bocinazo. This rhythm of the rhythm of the bocinazo usually is this ba 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 ba. It's like, and you hear it in a funeral procession down the street when somebody dies. It's like ba 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 ba. With the coffin. As I sit in Martita's car next to her, I watch her press on the horn with her whole body, her tears streaming down her face. She does not release the horn. Others too press the horn without releasing. There is no respite. Each horn pressed, layering onto another horn, onto another horn. Anguish. It is as if the whole neighborhood is giving a cry of pain. I cannot remember the sound fading. The clouds are breaking up. The rain has stopped. Dancers and a band from a Mapuche arts company arrive in a large bus. They begin their performance in the middle of the intersection. Drumming and stamping of feet resound through the streets. More and more neighbors group around the dancers and the band. A thin man with a gray beard who collects trash around the neighborhood is smiling and clapping his hands. He says, "Otra, otra," another one, another one. He puts down a 1,000 peso bill. People laugh. As the sun goes down, the sky lights up to a pink and yellow and saturates into a deep magenta. A neighbor points down the street to the sunset. When did we ever see such a beautiful sunset? And Ana enlists me, her sister, and cousins to hand out the white helium-filled balloons, adults passing balloons to eager children. Her balloon is the first of the flock of white floating up against the sunset. As the last of the balloons floats out of sight, a silence falls over the street as we watch family photos dissolve into each other, moving from the day of Camilo's birth to the day before his death. With the video projecting onto the wall of Martita's house at the threshold where Camilo had been killed, the house itself embodies and recollects this life. It is difficult to describe the stillness that came over the gathering as we watched. Neighbors see each other in the photos from when they were children. Some point and murmur the names of people they know, teachers, neighbors, a relative. Some see neighbors and family members in the photos who have also died. Sons, fathers, brothers killed. Friends and family members who have died of illnesses. So many deaths that we are remembering. As we listen to his favorite song, "Don't Cry for Me," by the group Tercer Cielo, placed at the end of the collage, I feel two small arms hook around my waist and a small face bury into the crook of my back. I look down to see 8-year-old Mirna. Blondie and Maru help Luciana and Constanza pass out candles to neighbors. As Blondie lights hers and sets it down next to mine, she speaks to her father, asking him to protect her from heaven. I look down at the street to see the 10-year-old Valentina set down a candle, saying simply, "Papa." With the intersection of the street lining candles in all four directions, Martita asked the parish priest to say some words. Surprised, he at first defers. Martita, however, insists. Bumbling and stumbling through words, he begins to gather momentum as he speaks generally of the discrimination against the neighborhood and the assassination of Camilo by the PDI. His talk swiftly, though he does mention it, moving over his own public call to the Ministry of the Interior years earlier for more police presence in the neighborhood, an intervention that set the conditions for Camilo's death. He leads us in reciting the Holy Prayer and in singing the Hymn of Happiness. Within this scene, where the Father is made to hear again his own words, to take responsibility for them, Martita offers us the last words of the evening. She simply thanks the neighbors for coming. Quote, "We need to begin to respect ourselves to be respected. I lost my son, but I gained a family." As the applause comes to an end, neighbors linger as they wait to embrace Martita. The candles slowly burn out overnight. The next morning, the streets are calm in El Hilo. A quiet reverberation of last night seems to come through each neighbor's morning greeting. Martita calls this fleeting feeling maravillada, or enchanted. But let us remember what are the conditions of this momentary feeling of enchantment. Finding within a new policy a chance to advocate for victims of the state's crime. The work of creating a community organization, even as it unravels and morphs into the possibility of neighbors claiming public space against the threat of police. In the form of documents stamped by the commissary. Neighbors remembering an attunement to the fragility of intimate relations, cooking, sweeping, painting, making a collection of photos in which the life of the neighborhood is projected in the life of Camilo. Remembering funerary practices for the dead and transfiguring them through their pitch and rhythm into a cry of pain from the we. I might return to the scene in which Lorena and Martita share in a passing conversation on the visits of their dead sons in dreams and Martita's gift of bread to a neighbor's granddaughter, and ask what connection there is between such scenes of ordinary life and preparations for the commemoration. That is this not the constant work of re-inhabiting everyday life or life, right? Okay, so by way of conclusion, I just want to say, and there's just two points. So the first point is really to say, what is actually missed in studies of policing when scholarship is completely saturated in state thinking. And I would say in Vinodas's words, where there is this uncanny resonance between scholarly prose and the discourse of policing, where we take, and we see this in the work on policing, where the male figure, the gang member, the soldier, the smuggler, for example, is really, there's like a kind of tight focus around these figures. On the other hand, the way in which social science knowledge is taken up by citizen security and policing, such that it's not simply that it's mirroring state policing discourse, but it actually has become a crucial relay, right, for the state administration of the poor. It becomes actually like terms such as territorial stigmatization, for example, the criminogenic environment, for example, become the relay through which the state administer the poor. And it gives the justification for police intervention, even as it completely eclipses the fact that the police are actually a protagonist in the disordering of the neighborhood. Okay, so that's the first point I want to say, and all of this would be eclipsed in what I just read to you in this kind of state thinking, right? Because it wouldn't be given importance. Okay, the second point that I want to actually, just bring out is really to think about the ways in which community engagement, community engaged research is actually imagined here. So, is the community placed in front of us simply just as if it were there just to see in front of us, right? And I think we probably all have some knowledge of the politics of community organizations. and such that, is not, there's always a politics among community organizations, right, in relation to this kind of community engaged research, particularly with universities, for example, right? That, in some ways also create this pressure for success stories, right? That there's these success stories in community engagement with particular organizations. So, one of the issues is, we might say, that the stories of failure get pushed aside, right? That there's no place for stories of failure because success stories are actually what are needed. But it's not, what I'm trying to actually also say is that the pressure to create success stories, or even the stories of failure, right, are actually making it impossible to register the achievements that I have actually described, right? Because it's precisely those achievements that are through the labor of women that are not, steeped in this state thinking, that actually simply would never be registered, right? So this may be kind of an opportunity in some ways to think more about what it is that how it is that we render the story of the neighborhood, right? And how do we think about the questions around like whose voices actually are eclipsed, right? So I would just wanted to thank you so much for your patience in listening to this talk, and I'd be happy to have a discussion. Thanks.